briefing. I invited you to speak to the country on 3 subjects. First of all, to use this opportunity to welcome you back. I remember seeing many of your cameras in Masaka on the 21st of June. So I sincerely and humbly welcome you back from our Thanksgiving ceremony. On behalf of my family, on behalf of the people of Masaka City, I thank you most sincerely for taking off time on a busy working day to pray with us, to thank God with us on that day. It was memorable, essentially not an easy one, because the preps were riddled with unnecessary contradictions from different corners, but because we were focused on what we intended to do, which was prayer in Thanksgiving, we had a very successful ceremony. I want to thank the media most sincerely. We had a lot of live coverage, and we had also post-activity reporting, quite accurately reported. Of course, not forgetting a few misreportings for which I blame no one. Probably the reporting in some areas was analogous to the blind that touched an elephant. I need not elaborate. So the people of Masaka are happy with you, and they continue to ask of us as citizens to remain united, because one of our solemn prayers on that day is to have a people that listen to each other, that support each other, that counsel each other, which for us as Masaka was an immense success. The second issue is again a follow-up from the events of 21st June in Masaka. Ever since that day and following my speech on that day, I have received innumerable emails, messages, phone calls, not from the media only, but from all sections of society, asking me to further elaborate what exactly I intend or am doing at the moment is a follow-up on the issues I talked about on that day. I am here to inform you and the country that I was not speaking in jest. Since 21st, I have been meeting a number of people, groups, leaders, communities, stakeholders at various levels. And the essence of those meetings is a follow-up on the issues I talked about, especially in my address to what I talked about as eminent and very important and deliberate electoral reforms that we must all be a part of. My statement in Masaka talked about the fact that we needed, as the opposition, a workable framework that will make the opposition functional beyond rhetoric and posturing. That the opposition at this stage should be in a position to posit the country into the possibilities. In that I mean, we have 1.5 probably years to have an election, to a possibility of an election. That means that if we are going to prevent a worst case scenario from happening, and I'm using the words purposefully, that if the opposition is going to enable the country to prevent a worst case scenario from happening, and the worst case scenario I mean is General Museveni succeeding himself, or even enabling his monarchical intentions. The opposition must engender a framework in which it has a common voice, and that voice must transcend color and creed. It's not the preserve of the opposition to talk about reforms. We need wide-ranging electoral and constitutional reforms, effectively saying that if the next cycle of electioneering is going to be purposeful, intentional, and therefore with the consequence of giving the country a new direction, it must be preceded by wide-ranging constitutional and electoral reforms. It's those reasons for which I have been consulting and meeting a number of stakeholders. I have gone out of my way to speak to individual colleagues in the parliament from across the political strata, including those belonging to NRM, independents. And we are gearing up to a framework, a forum of members of parliament, civil society, and other stakeholders to engender a wide-ranging national debate on constitutional and electoral reforms. I have also heard from colleagues in the opposition that say that all we need is a free and fair election. We don't have to have reforms. I dare say that that's an invitation for another round of circus, political circus, in 2025 or 2026, therefore. So the opposition must deliberate. So are we sure that in the current electoral framework and the current constitutional order, a mere election will transform and change the country into the kind of durable constitutional democracy that we desire? My sense is that no, we need to be deliberate, get out of our closet, reach out to each other, bury our hatchet, get out of our small clouds, open the cloud for all sorts of bulls, for us to be able, with the sincerity, talk to each other about the possibilities. Otherwise, for me, a mere return to an election will be a circus and will be a recipe for surrender. For example, how do you deal with an election, with a new electoral cycle, without addressing major contradictions that have become a major debate in this country? You follow as well as I do the questions that have arisen in the political space, for which citizens need answers. These answers cannot be settled or provided by a mere election being organized as a ritual. You have heard, for example, Ugandans is concerned about the size of our parliament. That actually our parliament is too big for a small economy. And I agree. And for me, this is not a new arena. Over the last couple of years, even when I was still LOP, I talked about these reforms, including reforms that will go a long way in reducing the size of parliament to rhyme with the capacity of the nation to support a sizable, purposeful, and useful parliament. People have talked about this. How do you achieve this without meaningful constitutional reforms and electoral reforms? We have spoken about changing the form of electing members of parliament. That the current first past the post does not give the nation the kind of parliament we desire. That probably a new arrangement in the form of proportional representation will give this country a better parliament. The last census, the census for which we have gotten provisional results, have given the country an indication of the structure of our population, in which young people between 17 and 25 years compose the majority. As I speak, we can only guarantee the younger people only 4 positions in the parliament, or probably 5, the 4 regional members of parliament for the youth, and then the woman MP, the youth MP for young women. Only 5 is a guarantee. If we changed to proportional representation and made it mandatory for each party to nominate a particular percentage of youth with categories. You can have 50 youth MPs in parliament or even more. Same thing with women. So I think we need to confront these issues with sincerity as a nation, and this is being corridor talk. So I am going to be leading the onslaught, at least in Parliament. I have spoken to other party platforms, not all, but I'm still consulting, so that we join together. It's not about me, it's not about my friends, it's about this country. And these, for me, are issues for which the opposition and other leaders that need a new Uganda, civil society, cultural institutions, religious institutions, must be offered a platform to speak to. How do you address, for example, the issue of Ugandans in diaspora who would like to have their voice heard in our elections? These are Ugandans in their thousands, if not millions, that subscribe to Uganda as home, but have no say in how the country makes a choice for leadership. Without meaningful electoral reforms, how do you guarantee their participation in the elections? These are the issues that we need to confront. I am aware of other nations in Africa in which the diaspora votes. So can the opposition run away? Can the political actors run away from the influence and impact of the diaspora and may provide a platform for their participation in the next elections? Otherwise, merely mentioning the volume of their remittances that support our small budget is not enough. We must make them an integral part of decisions in leadership in this country. And for me, it's a matter for which we must have an open conversation. How do we talk about decentralization now? We all know and agree that decentralization has actually failed. The last round of activity in Parliament, which composed of rationalization of government agencies, was an admission of the failure of this form of governance, which is decentralization in part. So the country must discuss any form of power sharing. The country must be able to discuss any form of devolution of power so that resources are shared properly. The country is discussing corruption at all levels of government, at all strata. So how do you guarantee that you decongest the center where corruption has taken root and be able to ensure that resources go to the people in their regions? Proportionately, people get resources depending on their contribution to the national budget, but also equalize for those regions that are still lagging behind without a proper framework in the constitution that guarantees devolution. So these must be debated and discussed. How do you go into an election without discussing the way the Electoral Commission is composed in a multi-party democracy? We may not achieve everything at a single go, but the opposition must lead an onslaught, must offer leadership in a honest conversation about the role of the Electoral Commission. How do you go into an election when you have a president that is in the evening of his career and life without properly discussing the transition? So, what form of transition? You remember the Dr. Bayiga bill that failed from the 9th Parliament, the presidential transition bill. It's high time this conversation returned on table to be part of the national conversation on how you transition from one person to the other. You witnessed an election in the UK in which a party lost, and on the same day a transition took place. So how can we be a pack of gamblers while not discussing democracy and transitions? There's no doubt the NRM or General Museveni will leave power. So should the transition be chaotic, how do we ensure? Who is the guarantor of our democracy? Who guarantees that? General Museveni can guarantee his power by holding on to the gun. That's why, in guaranteeing his power, instead of appointing medical doctors and teachers, they appoint small standard RICs. But who is going to guarantee, without a constitutional framework, the way transition as a country, and guarantee that the transition will not be chaotic, and guarantee that all institutions respect the transition? We must have this conversation on table and it does not end with us. It's not a preserve of politicians. How do you really go into another round of election cycle without guarantees on the role of the military? We all know the kind of mayhem military visited on political actors in the last election. Should we simply go back posturing as if nothing happened? As we speak now, the people who disappeared in the last election are still missing. In fact, I should inform the country that I've written to the Right Honourable Speaker about the commitments of government on the missing persons. My thinking earlier was that this was a matter that was going to be pursued by my successors, but seem to be sleeping. The same people were missing after the last election are still missing. I've written to the Speaker and I've retrieved the answer because Parliament deliberated and debated about these people, and there were decisions taken on that day, but there was no follow-up. So I want these issues. So how do you speak to these families of the missing persons? By simply telling back to go back to the booth and participate in another round of election? Do you even remember that the day that debate took place, we were able to situate a one-dam leader at CMI, and there was conceding by government that actually they have him? So how come that dam leader is still in detention? Has never been to court? So these issues must return before we can gear up for another, circus of an election. And there must be commitment from all and sundry that the rules of the game must be respected. But most importantly, the rules must be reconstructed for all to participate. The claim of it is late must not arise. It can never be late for us to do right. I've heard people saying, no, it's late, let's first just prepare for circus. It's not late, we have time. Unless some people have their brains on holiday in some cases. But if all of us have our brains working 24/7, we have time. I am actually aware that particular drafts of reforms have been made. I recollect the Honourable Nuwagaba's bill from the 10th Parliament. We can build on that. The Honourable Segona made submissions in the 9th Parliament. They are available. So it is let's talk. Is talk of the lazy and laggard. It must not be accepted. We must be warmer. We must warm up to a possibility. But all we need is to make sure that as leaders, we invoke everyone. We invite everyone to participate. Not politicians only. All stakeholders, all that are concerned with the future of this country must be given a platform to make their views felt and informed. I thank you. Probably I should respond to any questions if they're there in English before I give a brief Uganda version. But feel free to ask any question that you think is important for my attention to respond to you.
Honorable, relatedly about the electoral reforms, previously the Minister of Constitutional Affairs.
Justice and Constitutional Affairs.
Yeah. He said they don't have money to handle this process. And I think he was referring it to the Uganda Law Reform Commission. Do you think government is willing to take up this process?
I dare say that whoever raises the flag of money is just misleading the country. For example, did he indicate how much money he needed and it was not available? If you have money to dole out to Rocco and others, to Pineti, why not money to guarantee a constitutional order for this country? So the issue of money should not arise. Money can be found. Money is actually available. It's simply the loudest excuse, and nobody should buy into that. The Minister of Justice should not be waited for, and we are not going to wait for the Minister to act. As members of Parliament, we have a duty. Where the Minister slips on duty, the law allows us to raise private members' bills. Yeah.
Mine is not about money, but it's about the tactics they have put at play. Actually, if you look at the other bill that was tabled by, that was supposed to be tabled by Honorable Kabashai on reducing the size of Parliament, I think the excuse has been that the Law Reform Commission is scrutinizing, but it's taking ages to, get to the end. Don't you think part of your very beautiful proposals may suffer the same fate?
This is all politics stupid, as they call it. What really must be at the front is the will. As long as the country rises to make these issues pertinent and part of our national agenda, the money will be found, the law reform will act like there's no tomorrow, and whoever has the duty will act. There's nothing like a surgery there. The issues we want to rectify are well known and well documented. Besides, we are not reinventing the wheel, others have done so. So we're talking about the will to do right, to avoid a scenario where the transition is very difficult, is chaotic, because it's inevitable, the country must transition. I have heard some actors talking about a government of national unity as part of the transition, but how do you do that without going into a conversation that is open and enable citizens to participate and speak to us about what they don't like and what they like, to avoid chaos? So those excuses are simply plastic. We're only inviting for will of actors to do right, and I think it is feasible. We have time, we have resources, we have space and knowledge to do that.
Yeah. Maybe lastly, about these electoral reforms. I remember the last time when you were in New you elaborately put them out, and they weren't received, especially by the political group. Never received it passionately. The terrain has not changed. The same actors are still in those positions.
That's why I said in my submission that these reforms are not about politicians. They're about citizens and the desires of citizens. One subject them to the will of the people, and when the will people speak, then the politicians must direction from the mirror of the will of the people. When we put a small mirror in which politicians see their mouth and ears, then you can't have reforms. So we want to have a debate. That was a small room for political actors. So they must be subjected to the people. Are people satisfied with the way we function? Are people feeling secure about the transition? Are people feeling secure with the way resources are shared in this country? Do they feel involved? Do they see themselves as a part? So these are the issues that must come to the conversation. Then the actors will see the way. So we must insist. It has nothing to do. When they say they're not interested, but there are those that are interested. So how do we bring them on board? How do we simply avoid going into a political ritual for the sake of an election? Mr. Kajibi, yes.
I have a question on behalf of it. We have that you've done these electoral reforms, but which approach? Because you're saying that you talk about politicians that commit the society. Yesterday I saw when President Ruto was signing the assertion to the Ageesigika, and a lot of politicians were behind him, just because they realized that there's a Gen-Z that is not concerned about them. So politicians have to unite to make Kenya a better place to be if they want to remain in charge of the country. So, which is a good thing that now there's a third force in Kenya, the Gens who are not political aligned to any organization. So Uganda, in Ugandan perspective, people seem to be so detached from even engaging in political discourse. People seem to be so bored about politics, like they are not interested. How can Ugandans how can we ignite their appetite for politics in Uganda here? Because now people go for small things like there's money here, let's go. But issues to do with democracy, improving democracy, electoral reforms is a very boring debate in Ugandan community. What do you have?
I think you need to understand the genesis of your question. A 40-year rule can actually cause boredom. Children that were born 40 years ago, some have always gotten grandchildren, and all they have known is a regime that has thwarted all manner of change and reform. Because there has been an attempt to engender change using political means through contest, a contest that has been thwarted variously, so it is reason to cause apathy and frustration. The political class has a duty to ignite this fire and return the interests of citizens by ensuring that they communicate hope. This conversation must communicate hope to citizens and therefore invite their involvement and participation that tomorrow is going to be better. That if mistakes have been made in the past, the future must deposit hope and a promise to the young people. That's the message that should be filtering through. these conversations. My interest is that these conversations must return to the table, and we must listen to the people, hear from them, and therefore we should be able to find our bearing. You see, the problem with the political actors is believing that they are eternal. There's no eternal political actor. We transition. This service space is not eternal. It's not ordained, and therefore we can only be performing our duty as we subsist at the moment. So, the whole issue of what we learn from Kenya and the interest of the young people there, probably our political culture is a bit different, and we need to understand that. But that should not be reason for the young people in Uganda to remain apathetic and disinterested, and only interested in picking up phones and sharing pornography and what. They should be interested. The question they ask on social media should translate into activity and active involvement in what is being done, and they should be able to ask questions and demand for answers.
Maybe you can conclude with these two. One, when are we starting with the electoral reforms? When is the consultations starting? And then two, recently you were in Masaka. There is a statement you made. Some people got it the way they like it. Could you comment on that statement about the drunkenness and marijuana consumption? Maybe people will get you right, or you will prove those who got the message wrong.
Well, first of all, the consultations should begin in earnest. But I'm trying to speak to a number of stakeholders to get a framework, because it's not about my face and my personal involvement, but the interest and participation of all considered stakeholders. Probably that will be able to warm up the population to the possibilities, instead of waiting for polling day, which for me is unacceptable and something that I really think will be a very bad thing for Uganda, that is transitioning from a personal rule to a possible democracy if we engendered the requisite reforms, constitutional and electoral. Constitutional especially because the country needs a new consensus. I have said severally before that the current constitution was mutilated. It was predicated on a two-term president. It never was the wish of the framers of the constitution that we'll have a life presidency. So the predicate has since collapsed. So the country needs a new consensus on governance, power sharing, and the rest. So that consensus must come from a consultative process in which citizens at various strata participate without limitation. Your second question, I don't think I need to really hazard a lot in trying to answer that, because we have a lot to do. And I'd rather that we concentrate on the issues that are going to add clout to our obligation in the current space. If you're going to really spend a lot of time in exchanges that do not really help us as leaders, I don't think it's very necessary. It only serves to undermine our effort as leaders, and I think going forward, we have learned from people choosing each other, this and that. We now know the idiosyncrasies, the contradictions, the biases. We know that. That should really never deter us from doing right. I'd rather that we do that. Probably the past month will enable us going forward to peel back so many layers of contradictions, ignorance, misinformation, blackmail. I'd rather that we do not really take a lot of time to go into those small side shows, because eyes must be on the ball. If we don't do that, then we are only allowing the country, we're telling people that we are preparing the country for a worst case scenario that I talked about in my preamble of self-succession and a monarchical arrangement in our constitutional order, which I detest. Thank you. Okay. Mu bufunze nabayise okweyambisa emikutu gino